Welcome everybody to today's webinar on License Renewal Management with Team EDA's License Asset Manager. I'm Paul Riviere and I'm the Worldwide Alliance and Channel Partner Manager at Team EDA. And I want to discuss with you License Renewal Management. And if I could quote one of our large aerospace companies, LAMUM helps us keep track of thousands of licenses we own. We can also now share vendor information like contacts, purchases, renewal dates with other managers. Basically, the tagline here is that knowledge is power. So with this company, they're using License Asset Manager to keep track of all of their license information, whether it be the purchase order, the contacts, renewal dates, which is very important and the topic of today's webinar, being able to share that out of a central repository with other managers. So let's step through the meat of the presentation, and at the end of the presentation I'll jump into LAM itself and demonstrate some of the things that we talked about here. But basically I want to start off with what's the impact of engineering software license expiration? Very critical question in terms of the topic of today's webinar, but let's look at some of the answers, or possible answers I should say. So as we pose the question again, what's the impact of engineering software license expiration? Well, are all licenses unavailable because you forgot to renew? Is there a loss of productivity due to idle engineers? Is there a delay in design and simulation work for multiple projects and products? Or is there a delay in revenue recognition and profit? So if you contemplate this question and you see the possible answers to the question, if you've answered all of the above, very good answer, because that's exactly it. If we think of all licenses unavailable because you forgot to renew, that means that you could have 10, 20, hundreds of engineers that are not able to check out licenses so they can do their design and simulation or CAD work. Loss of productivity due to idle engineers, it means that they're idle. They have nothing to do, which equates to cost that's not producing anything. Delay in design and simulation work for multiple projects and products, you're counting on that work to be able to continue developing products and be able to get to manufacturing, to develop those products and make them available for customers to purchase. And as we think about making them available to customers to purchase, we now see a delay in revenue recognition and profit because you're not developing product to get out to address the supply and demand equation. So the answer is all of the answers above. So let's take a closer look at LAM and what we can do about license renewal management to ensure that we don't have idle engineers, we don't have lack of productivity, we don't have a delay in design and simulation, but ultimately we're able to recognize revenue because we have product that's developed and product for sale and product that's being purchased. So let's take a look at a LAMUM overview. LAMUM. There's the License Asset Manager, which we're going to focus on today. And then there's the License Asset Manager with usage monitoring. So making the connection from LAM to be able to monitor usage of networked, floating, and concurrent licenses. So when we take a look at LAM and we ask what is it used for? Well, basically we're using it for software asset management for all engineering applications that we're concerned with. These could be floating, node locked, or named user licenses, but basically we're keeping an eye on all of the license information for those assets. It could be the vendor license, applications, purchase order, and server daemon info. We have a better idea of contract and license renewal information, critical. We understand the context, whether from the vendor, the reseller, or technical support. And we can basically attach 9 documents to that license line item, whether it be a purchase order, an end user license agreement, or some other attachment that you want to maintain within this centralized database. And lastly, what we'd have with this license line item is the ability to connect to usage monitoring with a port at host, daemon manager, license manager connection, where we can start to collect data and make it available for historical as well as current usage reports. Some of the key benefits of LAM-UR is, first of all, it's a single pane of glass. So it's a bird's eye view of all of your license information. It provides the ability to consolidate that into one place. In a large engineering organization, you may have disparate groups who are using disparate ways of maintaining that information, whether it be an Excel spreadsheet, even a filing cabinet. This provides the ability to consolidate that into one central repository. Provides a decision support system for engineering software management. So you have a better idea of what you're using, how you're using it, your license checkouts. But in this case, we're going to focus on license renewal management. So we're keeping an eye on when those licenses are coming up for expiration and start to negotiate pricing to eliminate downtime because the license agreement was not renewed. We take it seriously in regards to engineering IT optimization, where many companies are focused on enterprise IT, asset management, and optimization. We extend that to engineering, following best practices that we feel are the best methods to managing your license environment. With the historical usage and the current usage, we can take a closer look by monitoring the usage patterns and trends, especially around peak times when you're doing new product design and simulation, and be able to understand what their trends are for license utilization and perhaps increasing license counts in those critical moments. We could take a look at saving costs. And from a saving cost perspective, we can look at two things. One is perhaps we have more licenses than we need, so we can take a look at perhaps reducing the license count. When it's time for renewal, it's the best time to start negotiating with the vendor or reseller. But we like to look at it as best using what you have with idle licenses, make it made available to engineers in other time zones, or perhaps providing opportunity for engineers to alter their work schedule to take advantage of those idle license times. In the end, we're looking at ensuring license availability. One, to eliminate engineering frustration, and two, to increase engineering productivity. Let's take a look at the LAM architecture. So we feature both Windows or Linux support. So we have two versions here. And we are cloud ready in that we have customers that are using it with AWS, Rackspace, and Microsoft Azure Cloud. Access to License Asset Manager is secured through port 8181, so a username and a password is required, and we'll take a closer look at that. But some of the layered products that are included with License Asset Manager and License Asset Manager with usage monitoring is the Apache Tomcat server, which provides the web interface. We provide access to web browsers such as Chrome, Firefox, Edge, and Internet Explorer. Maria database for relational database, and MySQL for queries to the database. The main components of LAM are Licenses tab, where we can configure and view and filter information. The Vendors tab, where we have the detailed information about those vendors, including the contacts, any contracts, address information, and other notes, as well as the attached documents. The Purchase Order tab, where we look at detailed information about those POs. The Expirations tab, which is the default tab when we go into LAM, where we can take a look at renewals from those that have expired in the last 30 to 60 days and those that are about to expire in 30 to 60 days to provide a proactive view of those license renewals that we better take action on to ensure availability going forward. The Tools tab provides a catalog of product name, vendor, and product from a discipline perspective as well. And then the Settings tab, which we'll look at first, is where we create the users and responsible persons for all of those license assets that we care about. So first, looking at user settings, take a look at adding a new user and responsible persons for license asset information. Looking at the user permissions, where we have the admin manager, email alerts, as well as daemon manager. But for LAM, we not too concerned about daemon manager because that's associated with usage monitor. We'll look at add new types, which could be a vendor type, a purchase type, a tool type, or a restriction type. And only the admin has the ability to look at that more closely. And with any of the tabs or license items, we're able to filter the inventory to look at different things. We also have the ability to enable email alerts when we set the frequency, and only the admin can do this, but we set the email alerts that the contact person for each license line item would receive based on the frequency when licenses are due for renewal. So as mentioned, the types that we look at are the vendor types, which could be direct or reseller. The purchase type, which could be an annual subscription. It could be a perpetual with maintenance, a perpetual without maintenance if a customer doesn't care about the maintenance or need for technical support or perhaps new updates annually. A perpetual license standalone, and then the maintenance. This is the maintenance agreement on an annual basis that would accompany a perpetual license. The tools could be normal, spare, or temporary. And then from a restriction basis is what's the restriction on those license types? Could it be local area network, wide area network, which would be much more expensive, but more widely available from a time zone and worldwide perspective? Is it node locked? Or is it a wide area network in just a specific country such as US? Or is it wide area network on a global perspective? If there's any other types that are needed by customers, we can also add types to a LAM to be able to monitor or contain that usage information, license information as well. So looking at the licenses tab, and this is the heart of LAM and where we go in and we create the license line item, which is associated with the purchase order, the vendor, the tool, and any server information we have that we would make a connection to the license manager or daemon. We're able to configure that view with up to 20 fields, and we have the ability to look at the unique to user currently logged in. We can import from an Excel spreadsheet. So we provide a template that has a template for all of the tabs that we've talked about, the license tab, the purchase order tab, tools, vendor, and server tab. And it's in a specific format to make it easier to import and populate your license line items that way. We also have the ability to add them individually. As we're looking at the license line items, we can sort by clicking on each of the column headers, so look at it alphabetically. We can also filter by entering filter information to focus on those that perhaps start with C or some other nomenclature. And we can also provide a summary of quantity and total dollars in terms of the purchase price of those license assets. So here's a look at the license line item fields. We can look at we have the ability to add the necessary information for vendor, the tool and product name, the quantity, the date acquired, and expiration. And those four elements or fields are important and required for the addition of a license line item. Provides the ability to sort on vendor tool and understand the quantity of licenses that we have, but more importantly for license renewal management, the data was acquired and when it expires so that we can take action to renew. The version number of the software that's being used, associated to the purchase order for that license line item, as well as some of the other things we talked about from a types perspective, so the tool type, the purchase type, whether there's any capital or expense dollars associated with it, which is critical in sorting and understanding your overall software cost. Who's that responsible person for that line item? This is the person who's going to be responsible and take proactive action to renew that license. What are the license numbers? Key to know, as well as any notes that are associated with that license line item, the restriction type that we talked about, and what type of license manager is it? So is it node, network, or some other license manager type? And if a license file is associated with the license manager that we're using in network, floating, or concurrent license, what is that license file? That can be entered as well to be able to take a look at that to understand the features and licenses available for the license line item. Looking closely at vendor information, we are able to provide the type of vendor that it is. So remember, direct or reseller. Up to 9 key documents can be associated with the vendor portion of the line item. Any notes associated and key information around the address and phone number and how to contact that individual and who are the contacts from that vendor, as well as a history of purchases to understand your purchase patterns. The PO information, again, contains some of the same fields. So the vendor, it would include the purchase number, obviously, to understand the purchase items, the date and requisition number, who was the approver of that specific invoice, and what's the status of that PO. Again, attaching up to 9 key documents for the purchase order itself. When the invoice was paid to date, any notes associated with the PO, and who's the charge center or cost center, who's picking up the cost of that software. Very important to know they're an approver in the process. And what commodity code that may be associated with the PO from an accounting basis. So the expiration tab is the default tab when we get into LAM, but this provides renewals past due and how many days it's overdue, the renewals upcoming in X number of days, the number of days the current logged in user requested, and each LAM user can specify their own notification time period. So we can set that based on a 30-day, 60-day, whatever time period is required to be notified to start that proactive activity to renew the licenses, negotiate new pricing, add or subtract new features, whatever it may be. LAM, with all of the information that we contain in this centralized repository, we have canned or one-click reports to check various items. So this is just a short list, so we can look at the current license tool inventory in 13 different ways. We can look at expense estimates, critical for budgeting by period or by vendor. We can look at the PO history, looking at the vendor, the cost center, and looking at any time period. Who are the vendor's contacts? And most importantly, for the topic of this webinar, are the expiring licenses. So having a bird's eye view in a report format of the license expirations that are coming up. That would be any license that's expiring in the future, from today, later in the day, till tomorrow, to a month out, to 2 years out. But basically, you have an idea of your licenses that are in play today and when they're expiring, and much, much more than that. From a renewals management perspective, we look at a couple of methods to do that. So we can clone, using the clone method, we can create a new line item from an existing old line item. We keep the old line item in the central repository or the database, but we make a clone of it that we can go in and then edit the information that's pertinent to the new renewal license agreement that's about to come in. By doing this, though, you dramatically increase the number of line items. So if you're cloning on license line item, you now go from 1 to 2 and so on. As you continue to clone, your license line item list is going to continue to grow. The edit method, however, is simply clicking on the license line item to edit and changing the relevant information of that line item, whatever it may be. In this case, might be changing the expiration date. So if the expiration date is 30 days out, you now receive the new license key. You can change that expiration date to be 1 year out from whatever that new purchase order and quote was. And in comparison to the clone method, it does not create a duplicate of the previous line item. It keeps the same single line item, and it doesn't cause the database to grow because you're adding more line items. So cloning a line item, it's very easy to do with a simple click, easy way to duplicate a similar entry. We simply duplicate that entry and change only the information we need to for that cloned entry. We can simply click on the tool name, then we click on clone, and then we have that second line item for that type of license. And we change what we need to and save it. And there you have it. You have an additional line item based on your new license agreement, and you're ready to go and ensure that your engineers are going to continue to be productive. From an interfacing perspective, LAM We can export LAM in several formats, whether it be an Excel, a CVS, or an XML formatted file. We also, because of our layered product inclusion of MySQL, we can do scripting to harvest any data in any way that's necessary in the LAM database, and we have the table schema that we can provide upon request. And to import or to create line items, we have the opportunity to do this manually, one by one, referencing perhaps an Excel spreadsheet or perhaps a hard copy purchase order or with all of the necessary information. Or using our template, we can simply import into LAM and populate the line items that way. For those customers that are looking for some customizations to the interface, we do offer non-recurring engineering capabilities to customize for customers, and we base the price on scoping the project and providing a NRE quote to a customer. And of course, it's subject to scoping that out and the statement of work. This takes a look at a LAM import template. And this specific one is looking at the vendor template. And here we see that name is in red. That means it is a required field for the vendor template and even the vendor tab in LAM. All of the other information is optional, but obviously you'd want to fill this out as much as you can so you have all of the necessary information available regarding that vendor item. It's important to know that the sequence is critical, so keep the same format that you see here in this Excel template. And we have a large library of marketing resources as well as resources regarding the use of LAM and LAM-UM. So we have an application note that is specific to the templates and understanding the sequence for importing into LAM. So now let's take a look at expiration alerts. In this webinar, we're focusing on License Asset Manager, but we also have the ability to look at it in usage monitoring. From a LAM perspective, we obviously set the right expiration date manually per line item or import it through the template. But we also need to add up the LAM mail server. So this enables the ability to do email alerts. And each user that is going to receive alerts must have an email address as part of their user profile in LAM. And we have the ability to set the alert notification time period, whether it be 60 days, 30 days before expiration. On the right-hand side, you see the tab, which we're going to look at in a little bit, which shows all of the LAM tabs at the top, starting with expirations, the default. And the first item you see is those licenses and agreements that expired in the last 30 days. And we can export those to 3 different formats, whether it be CSV, .xlsx, or XML. And then we see a second item there, which is licenses and agreements expiring in the next 30 days. In both cases, we do have a couple of entries or an entry in each one. So Abacus expired for the tool FE Safe, and expiring in 30 days or less than, depending on the date of this particular screenshot, is Abacus for computer-aided engineering. Again, 3 different ways we can export that. But as we go into LAM, very proactive in providing that information before you do anything else regarding license line items. So you're alerted right away before you even need to do any reports on what you have for upcoming expirations. When we make the connection to a networked, floating, and concurrent license, we now do usage monitoring, and we can also look at license file expiration there. And to do that, we're reading directly from the license manager or daemon, and how we list it here is the port at host when we make that connection. We can set it by a tag. Tag is a friendly name for the port at host. And we can select the different tags that we want to send alerts by email to the responsible person. Again, setting the warning period is based on the specific tag and the user. And that user will receive an email alert based on the frequency and the warning period that's specified for the license expiration. Very important is to set that alert period long enough to provide enough time to contact the vendor or reseller and get a new license line file. So there's obviously negotiations involved. There's time to get the purchase order and get approved. So allow yourself long enough time to be able to make that work, to get that license file in time to ensure your engineers are maintain productivity. So at this point, I'd like to open it up for any questions that anybody may have. So let me pause and see if we have any questions in. And if you do, please unmute and ask your question. I'm going to look at, see if we have anything in the chat box, and we don't. So let's take a look at any questions from the audience. Okay, I'll assume we have no questions. So let me continue by going into LAM. So let me start with secure access, and I'm going in through my account. It's RIV for short, and I log in. And immediately it takes me to the Expirations tab, where I have a view of licenses and agreements that expired in the last 30 days. So earlier in June, we had 3 that expired. And then we take a look at those that are expiring in the next 30 days. And again, we can set that to 30 days or 60 days, or whatever is your preference. But we have nothing expiring in the next 30 days, so that's goodness. That ensures that for the next 30 days, all engineering software will be licensed and able to be used and checked out by the engineers in our organization. So the first thing that I want to go to is user settings. So I'm trying to follow the format of the agenda for the presentation. So going to settings, I click on settings. In here I have 3 things that I can create, view, or edit. So the first thing I have are users at the top. So I'm currently logged in as Paul Revere for the username of RIV. And you can see here the list of a total of 10 items or 10 users that we have created in our demo environment with various types of rights or privileges. So you see admin, which has all rights and privileges and can do anything required in LAM, from creating a license line item to changing critical things that nobody else can with simply manager, email alert, or daemon manager rights. We also look at Guy Haas and myself, who have all privileges as well for the purpose of giving demonstrations. But we have others with either no access at all, and some that just may have manager and email alert, which allows them to be alerted to an expiration that's coming up. So we can simply go in to add new user. And here we have information that's critical, and that would be the first and last name of that user, what their login name is going to be. For me, it was RIV. And what they need for rights, admin, manager, and email alert. And then a password, obviously, because we do require secure access. We don't want just anybody going in and changing asset information or perhaps viewing cost information. And then anything in black, these fields are optional, but it's very important to follow best practices and a methodology that includes all the information that is available to make sure that your database for LAM and all of your line items is up to date and is fully populated, especially for audit and compliant reasons. So when I'm done and I provided all the information, I click submit, and then I would have a new user. 2 other things that are important are, 1, the email settings. So we'll see here that we have a mail server set up for the purposes of this demo, and the mail server account that would be used for testing, which is mine. We have enabled email alerts, as well as the responsible person for any expirations coming up. And we can have the ability to test here by providing the email address and doing a send test email to make sure that it's sent and received by the intended person. But to add that or to edit this, we simply go into edit the mail server, and provide the necessary information. Again, we want to make sure that we have email alerts enabled, as well as the alerting the responsible person that's associated with the line item to receive an email alert as well. And if this is critical, obviously we probably want a daily email alert to let them know that they're responsible and they've got to take action. It should be doing so to provide time for any lag because of purchase order creation, approvals, providing banking account information for that purchase, whatever it may be. Allow enough time and be proactive in making sure that the responsible person is alerted to make sure they take action. The second thing is change types. So when we talked in the presentation about the different types, this is where we can enter new values. I mentioned we can add others as we need to. And here we can add the different tool types if the ones that are listed here in this menu is not sufficient. And again, further down, the restriction, the purchase type, the standalone type, and the vendor type. If what is there is sufficient, that's great. If not, you can enter new values and add them to the types table. So now let's go to licenses. And this is the heart of LAM, and where we have the ability to take a look at the licenses that we have. Currently, I'm looking at only one. That's not a problem. It's because I filtered this for another demo. So I simply go up and I clear any filter that I've applied and hit submit. And now I see all of the licenses in LAM database. So from Abacus all the way down to Xilinx, almost a complete A to Z. You have the ability here to, again, export all of this to 3 different formats: a CSV, which is a comma delimited file, an Excel spreadsheet, or an XML file. At the top of this, each of these column headers, we have an up and down arrow, and we're able to sort alphabetically. Right now we're going from A to Z. If I hit the arrow, we now go from, in this case, X to A that way. Or we can sort on the tool, the purchase order number, and so on, to be able to sort according to our needs. If we wanted to apply a filter, then we simply would enter the information that we want to filter on. And let's say we want to look at anything with ABAQ. For me, I'm focusing on Abacus. So it provides all of the different licenses associated with the vendor Abacus. And you see that we have 6 different tools here. Some of them may be the same, but they're different license line items. So it's pertinent to perhaps a purchase order for a license that we had 2 years ago, and also a purchase order for Abacus Standard that is probably most current or expiring later on. Sometimes customers will purchase a license agreement for X number of users, and then when they need more users, they'll add on to that by purchasing another license agreement for that incremental user need. So I'm going to go back into filter. I'm going to clear my filter so we can see everything. And we can also configure the view. So when we looked at the license line list, we were looking at all of the information that's checked off here. If we wanted to add the cost or amount, I would simply put a check in the amount box, hit submit. So now I'm looking at the cost associated with this license line item. So it gives a good idea of our spend. And that spend is important if it comes down to a central organization in engineering who's accepting all of the costs or expenses for the engineering software, but then trying to reallocate and get reimbursed from the engineering groups that are using it. They have an idea of that spend, can associate that with a billing cycle, perhaps a 30-day billing cycle, and get an estimate or a true look at the cost of engineering utilization for specific users in a cost center. So we looked at this a little bit, but adding a new item is very simple. We can do it manually by entering the vendor information, the tool item information, the date acquired and expiration date, the date being the current date, the expiration date being 1 year from the current date. If we know the exact date for the specific line item that we're adding, we can adjust this accordingly. And then we add the quantity, and for LAM's purposes, we simply add 1 And for the network connection, we rely on the license file to provide more information about that. If it's a node-locked, or perhaps a HASP type of license, we can actually enter the actual quantity here. But for a network connection, we enter one because we consider it a suite. And then we use the license file to determine the licenses for each of the features within that tool. If in the drop-down menu we don't have a vendor to choose from, we can add a new vendor. And when we do that, this is taking us essentially to the vendor tab and asking us for the information. Most critical or mandatory is the name of that vendor, where we enter the name and hit submit at the bottom. Tool and line item, the same thing. If we know of tools, we may be able to select it here, especially if we are making a duplicate manually or cloning manually. But we can do the add new tool as well and have the ability to provide the vendor and name information for this license line item. Hit submit, and that'll populate the tool table and also populate the information needed for creating this license line item, and so on and so forth. As we get to usage monitoring for network floating and concurrent licenses, down in the right-hand side is we would enter information regarding the restrictions. And remember, we looked at the type of restriction types, so it could be LAN, WAN, could be node locked, and so on. When we do that, let's say it's LAN, and we understand the license type. Maybe it's FlexLM, which is one of the more common license managers for networked and floating licenses. We would simply select FlexLM. If we know the path to the log file, we could enter it here and test it to make sure we have rights to access the log file. And the log file is used for parsing some of the usage data, specifically denials. So if we want to look at denials and provide graphs and tables regarding denials of licenses, we do that through the log file. When we make that connection, we typically do a port at host, where we do an add new port at host. But we have to have all of the red information first before we can actually do that. But we're focusing on License Asset Manager here first. But when we have the information we need for that license line item, we don't care about the network connection at this point, because we want to focus on assets information. We can simply add the information and hit submit. And then it gets added to the list or the table for licenses for us to be able to edit in the future, perhaps view, perhaps sort on to look at the different licenses that we have based on the sort and filter criteria. So at the very beginning, we looked at the expirations, and we have the different items here that we can look at. So the renewals that are past due, the renewals that are coming up, and what we should do to proactively work on that. Now let's go to look at the reports for a one-click view of the reports. As I mentioned, there's 13 ways to look at current license inventory, and basically at by license type, a wide area network license type, or a local area network, and so on. Further down, we can look at current license inventory by vendor, which are not expired and have been extended, and others. We can also look at the license inventory for standalone, for perpetual licenses, and more. Let's take a look at a wide area network, and you can see how in the beginning in license line items, we had, I want to say, 80 or more different license items that we had in our database. Now we're filtering or providing a report, strictly those that are associated with wide area network, which narrows it down, gives a better perspective on what are typically our most expensive licenses, because wide area networks provides availability on a global basis and provides the concurrent usage availability for a wider audience. I wanted to look at expiring licenses. We did that by looking at the expiration tab when we first got into LAN. Here we can look at a report that shows us all of the licenses that are coming up for expiration. And as you can see, the expiration or expiry date lists them from the next renewal being in August of 2021, and that are some that are probably exaggerated because they're probably a perpetual license and we don't really care about when they're going to expire, but those that are expiring in 1-2 years from now. So we have an idea of a timeline. We need to be more proactive. So with something expiring in August, we should actually take action now to start the renewal process, understanding the license, what are the license needs, and what do we need going further for a new license agreement that's going to extend or continue utilization or availability for engineers going forward. So for renewals management, we talked about the cloning method. And let's see if I can expand this. Hey, Travis, could you jump in here and guide me through the clone method?
Yeah, but so you want to try to clone a line item itself?
Yeah, so let's do this. We'll go into Abacus Standard, and what we do is we look at that specific line item. We could edit it, we could delete it, or we could create a new one, or we could clone it. So we're going to clone this one. And as you can see, it's going to create a duplicate. It's going to the same information from the existing line item, but here we can change information. So we could change the quantity. So we had 10 for Abacus. It's expiring in August 27th of 2022. Let's say we need to increase our license count as well as renew. So we're going to increase the quantity of 15, renew it for another year, and set that up. To another year from now. Order number is going to change, so we'd add a new PO for that by adding new PO. Because it's new, we're certainly not going to be in the drop-down menu, so we certainly do an add new PO. To the PO tab, template for adding a new purchase order vendor name of Abacus. And once we have changed all of the information, we're ready to submit this for cloning. We quickly do a submit, and we now have a new entry here that's going to take us to August 27th of 2023. So that's the simple method for doing a clone. The edit method, let's say we have an Abacus electronics package right here. This one's expiring in 2023. We can actually edit it, change information here, and then use the existing line item by submitting, but changing the necessary information for the line item and the renewal process. So I mentioned how we interface LAM with internal systems. So we can basically use Excel spreadsheet format to export. We can use a common delimited file in the .csv format as well as a .xml. Basically, we can also do a MySQL scripting to do any type of query to harvest data for the needs that we may have. And we provide the table schema based on request to be able to do the MySQL queries. We also have the ability to import. So as we showed you with creating a new license line item, we can go and do an import. So we basically choose the file that we want to import. But before we do that, we have the Excel template file, which I'll open up here. And then for LAM, we have this import file that has a template for each of the different tabs. So looking at the vendor tab, and again, this sequence or list of columns with these column headers is critical. It must be in this format to import to LAM. Only required for vendor is the name of that vendor. But again, for compliance and audit purposes, it's best practices to ensure that you have all of the fields populated for that purpose. So that's vendors. Tools, a little different. Required a vendor and name, and then the other information associated with it. And now I can look at the others. I'm going to strictly go to licenses. And this is where we have all of the fields required for a license line item. So that's going to capture the vendor information, but here we're going to required are the tool, the date acquired, and the quantity. Everything else is optional, but again, best practices. Be sure to populate each and every field for compliance and audit purposes. There's a README file here that provides information on what is required. As well as the help list of types. So we looked through the types when we went into settings and looked at the standalone types, the restrictions for network licenses, and so on to get an idea of the different types that we can select when creating a license line item. I can't overstate the fact that for each of these different templates for the different tabs, again, it's important that you follow the formatting. It's very critical that the information get entered exactly as you see it in the template format to ensure that it's populated into the license line item and database correctly. So that ends the demonstration of License Asset Manager with a focus on license renewal management. I'll open it up again for any questions that you may have, and I'll pause for any questions to come forward. All right, I see that we have no questions. So what I wanted to mention now is thank you very much first for joining. Please understand that this was recorded for replay. It will be available in the next day for any associates that you may have that are interested in listening to the recording with stop and start to be able to play back as needed or play forward to look at some things that are important for what you need to know about License Asset Management Manager with a focus on license renewal management. But in the LAM tool in the upper right-hand corner, we have a help link in red that takes you right into the user manual in a PDF format, allows you the ability to search for anything that you need assistance with. We also have a very large library at tmeda.com/resources where we feature application notes, white papers, and other materials that are helpful in your journey through License Asset Manager. Our technical support team is available 24/7 and reachable by support@tmeda.com or call us at 603-656-5200 and ask for myself. I'm also at extension 104, or just explain that you need technical support and we'll guide you through providing that support and continue on your way to license renewal management using License Asset Monitor. So thanks for your time today, and good journey through engineering software asset management and optimization, and look forward to working with you in the future. Thanks and have a good day.
Thanks, Paul.